The previous basket is under review.
Welcome into another episode of Weekend Under Review. That is Matthew Winick. I am Brian Rauf, here to recap a golden weekend of college basketball action, you could say. Not just U.S. beating Canada, but a very fun weekend of high-profile hoops. And then we got another week of really awesome games. This is what late February is supposed to provide us, and we are getting that. We'll get to breaking down the biggest games after we remind you to subscribe to Basket Under Review if you have not already. A subscription to Basket Under Review gets you access to all of our paywall content on the website, basketunderreview.com, and access to the Discord, which, if you want to know where Chili Donovan puts all his scoops and his intel, which is very good to know this time of year as the season winds down and there are coaching carousel moves and transfer portal additions and things will be happening. Nobody's more on top of that than Chili Donovan. All of that is in the Discord. Subscription to Basket Under Review, again, to get you access to everything on the website and access to the Discord. So make sure you do so if you have not. Tell a friend to do so if they have not as well. All right, Matthew, let's get into this. Any one of three games really could have started with from Saturday night. We're just going to go chronologically through them, starting with Arizona, Houston. Then we'll get to Michigan, Duke, get to BYU, Iowa State. Arizona became the second team since Houston entered the Big 12 to win a Big 12 game at the Fertitta Center at Houston. It was not something that we really expected, although you did pick Arizona to win this game. Why did you pick Arizona to win this game? How are they able to get it done?
I picked Arizona to win this game because Houston has shown signs against good teams all year of not being typical Houston defensively. And it happened again. Story happened again here. They allowed 76 points on 60 possessions to Tennessee early in the year. They beat Arkansas, but I remember vividly Kelvin Sampson after that game being like, this was not a good game from us. We just happened to be unbelievable offensively. Then they started their Big 12 season with a big win at home against Texas Tech, but only by 4, barely. And then ever since, it's been, very average. Horrible defense against Texas Tech that second go round on the road where they lost and allowed 90. They won at BYU, good game, but that one was still close coming down the stretch. And now back-to-back losses at Iowa State and at home against Arizona, nothing to cry about, but the defense in big games has continued to not be there. Arizona's bigs, Tobe Awaka and Mo Krivas, were in foul trouble all game. They combined. Neither of them played more than 25 minutes. Obviously, you can't necessarily account for Anthony Delorso dropping 22, and credit to him. He played really well. But this was we talked about Houston not getting any steals in that game against Iowa State. There were 3 turnovers for the Cyclones. In this game against Arizona only turned it over 5 times. Houston is not dominating the glass. They're not winning the turnover battle, and they are not a top 5 team in the country if they're not doing that. And against good teams, they aren't.
The flip side of that is, while we have talked about Houston not being as Houston like this year because of the defense, they've been able to offset that with better offense than they've had for most of Kelvin Sampson's tenure, right? That has been what has offset that and kept them at this level. This is 2 straight games now where they have had very long offensive droughts, very long stretches of just putrid offense against high-level teams. It cost them the end of the game against Iowa State when they had the lead, allowed Iowa State to pull off that late run and win the game. And then they went 11 minutes without making a basket in this game, and that allowed Arizona to create the buffer, go on the 10-0 run they went on, create the buffer to close this out there. Like that is a problem as well, because past Houston teams, if they have had offensive stretches like this, the defense was enough to not let everything get away from them, right? Houston's defense is still good. The metrics tell you it's still a top 10 defense in the country, but it is not Houston good. And Houston has needed their defenses to be Houston good to offset the offensive limitations that they've had. As good as Kingston Flemings is, as good as Manuel Sharp is, as good as Milos Uzan is, they haven't been able to really get out of these ruts. And now it's become a problem the last couple of years, even going back to the first Houston teams that made a run. You can go back to some of the Rob Gray teams that made runs. There were some front court guys that could take some pressure off of the backcourt. Houston's always had that lead guard, Rob Gray, Jamal Shed, Kingston Flemings, go down the list. There's been somebody in the front court who takes some of the pressure off. Like last year, Juwan Roberts was huge for that. The front court hasn't been that this year, so it allowed Arizona, and Arizona's a really good team, which, hey, reminder, Arizona lost 2 games. They're still a really bleeping good team, right? We'll talk about them here in a second. But it allowed them to really pressure the perimeter, and they're like, okay, JoJo Tugler, Chris Sinak, like, let's see you do something here. And they did get Arizona's bigs in foul trouble, but they didn't do anything to take some of the pressure off of the backcourt, and it allowed Arizona to play in a way that made Houston's guards more ineffective than they have been.
Yeah, Houston will never make a Final Four if their offense is better than their defense, so long as Kelvin Sampson is the head coach of the Cougars, just because of the way they play, and they don't necessarily take efficient shots. Their defense is what drives their offense and vice versa. They cannot win games if the offense has to play in the half court. They don't get steals. They don't get more shots than their opponent. Their 6 worst defensive games this year on a point per possession basis: BYU, Arizona, Arkansas, Iowa State, Tennessee, Texas Tech. Yes, their defense is 9th, but it's off of the backs of their bye games and the inferior Big 12 opponents. As you mentioned, we're going to talk about Arizona. Arizona is not inferior. And the fact that Anthony Delorso played so well, we were worried about their depth, especially no Koa Pete, no Dwayne Aristote, who's their 8th man. If Anthony Delorso is as efficient of a shooter as he was last year, and he plays well down the rest of the stretch of the season, that's a game changer for this team.
Yeah, and we talked about it before this game, and I think it was maybe a week ago now, where he had been shooting below 30% from 3 on the season. Like, he had not been as efficient offensively as he had been the 3 previous years of his career, right? And so we wondered, is this just something with this offense, something with this team, and his new role now, because he was in the starting lineup end of last year, and he has become a bench player this year, which rightfully so. We saw what Ivan Karchenkov can do. Braden Burry's not taking him out of the starting lineup. Delorso's going to take a back seat. And we've seen some, progression up back to the mean here from him. So I do think this isn't just fool's gold. I don't know if he's going to be this efficient all the time, but I think we are seeing, like, okay, he's getting back to his normal form. And when that happens, it allows Braden Burries to have an off game. Jaden Bradley was inefficient. He made the plays down the stretch. He really stepped up late in this game, but there was 35 minutes there was like, oh, Jaden Bradley's inefficient offensively again, and Arizona looks vulnerable. What a surprise. Delorso and Karchenkov won this game for Arizona. To me, with their level of play, Delorso offensively and Karchenkov, what he was able to do on both ends, those two were the biggest factors in this game for Arizona, and maybe the biggest factors in determining how far Arizona goes in the tournament and what they look like moving forward.
The one thing I feel confident in saying is Arizona has the highest floor of any team in the country. And honestly, I don't even know if it's that close. They are so steady with the way that they rebound, with the way that they score on the interior, that they basically, the only way the Arizona loses is if a team plays an A-plus game against them. And of course that did happen 2 times, but they've shown in that BYU game and now in this Houston game that if it's even a B plus, A minus game from their opponent, Arizona, their floor and the way that they are so steady, they're too good to lose unless another team, quote unquote, beats them.
Mm-hmm. One thing we talked about with Arizona, and you were adamant about this before they went on this stretch, because it's now been 4 straight games: Kansas, Texas Tech, BYU, Houston, and Baylor. Then they'll face Kansas this weekend, and then Iowa State. Surprise. This condensed end of the season with all the top teams in the Big 12 playing each other, you were adamant, like, do not worry if Arizona loses a couple games. They're going to, because of how tough the schedule is. Houston's facing the same kind of thing, and they've suffered a couple of losses now. But I'm getting the sense for you it feels differently with the way Houston is losing these games and playing than the way Arizona was. Am I wrong in reading that?
Yeah, because Houston, their identity is on the defensive end. It's always been that way, and that's where their success has come. And it's their defense that's letting them down. It's not that they're missing shots. I mean, they are. But their defense is not playing well, and their rebounding has not been to the level it has had to be all year long. And it consistently has been showing up all year long against good opponents, whether they win the game like the Arkansas game or the first Texas Tech game. It still has been an issue. And so the fact that now those are turning into losses has sort of illuminated this problem into a larger light.
I'm trying not to be prisoner of the moment with this. but I've been looking for a team that I feel like I can really trust to like pick to win the national championship, and there's still time. I am 95% sure I'm going to pick Arizona to win the national championship when brackets come out. We've seen them win games every kind of way. We've also seen them win games every kind of way, playing well and not playing their best. But guys have made plays. They just beat Houston at Houston without a great offensive showing, like as a team, right? Their bench stepped up and made some big plays in that game. We've seen them beat BYU at BYU, playing a more up-tempo game, and they won that game with their defense. We've seen them beat teams like Florida and Alabama with their offense. We've seen them do it at home. We've seen them do it on the road. We've seen them do it on neutral courts. I don't know if their ceiling is the highest in the country. Michigan's is probably still the highest. Duke is playing at a really, really high level right now. I don't mean to write them off. We're going to get to that game next. But I do think we've seen from Arizona, Jaden Bradley has won games for them. Braden Burries has won games for them. We just saw Anthony Delorso and Avin Karchenkov win games for them, right? Toby Awaka has not won games, but been the biggest factor in a game that they have won. Mo Krivas has been the biggest factor in a game that they have won. They have done this so many different ways to where matchups matter so much in the NCAA tournament. They are, I think, as matchup proof as there is in the country. Front court is won games, back court's won games offensively, defensively, playing fast, playing slow. That is, I think, what you look for in a team that can win 6 games in March against the path you are going to have to go through this year. So give me the Wildcats right now. I think we need Koa Pete back healthy if we're going to, firmly get to that point. But all expectations and all signs point to him being back sooner rather than later. That happens. I'm going to pick Arizona to win the national championship.
It's interesting you say that, given the game that is coming up next in our rundown.
Well, let's get to that, because Duke just beat Michigan in DC, and it was a game where Duke won it with their defense. Duke won it by making plays down the stretch that we have criticized them for not making at times this year and questioning if they could make, because there is not a ball dominant guard that has been reliably making plays late in games that you typically need. Didn't matter in this game against the number one defense in the country, what was the number one defense in the country in Michigan. I was incredibly impressed by what we saw from Duke on Saturday night. What did you see from them that allowed them to beat Michigan, who just a couple days ago, the general consensus was maybe it's Michigan and everybody else?
Something that you mentioned talking about Arizona when you said that they were the team that you would say would win the national championship was that you said they were matchup proof. And the reality is Michigan is not matchup proof because they are so dominant in the way that they play and their spurt ability and their size and their rim dominance on both sides of the floor. But you can out scheme them. And this is exactly what Duke did. Duke slowed this game down to a 62 possession affair, which is nowhere near what Michigan wants to do. On the year, they average a 72 possession game, so 10 below expectation on average. And then they forced Michigan into 25 threes. Almost half of their shots were from deep. This is a team that is way better at the rim than they are shooting. Obviously, they can shoot, and ask Purdue what it's like when the shots go in. But you want this Michigan team to fire away from deep because they might hit them, but it's not as efficient as when they are around the rim. When Michigan has to play a slow half-court game that is reliant on skill and jump shooting, that you have now sucked half of their power out of their lineup because the transition's gone and the interior's gone. And Duke did a spectacular job of forcing this game to be played that way. And in the half court, they had the best player in this game, as we expected coming into it, with Cameron Boozer. Jax Lendeborg had a great first half, but as the game wore down, it was clear who the best player on the floor was. And in a slow game, Duke has had issues in late game execution throughout this season and also last, but it's not like Michigan is an elite execution team either. And Duke was the better team down the stretch at playing slow in the half court. This is what they do.
If there was any debate coming into this game about who the National Player of the Year would be, there is no debate. It's over. It is over now. Cam Boozer is and has been the best player in the country, but if his biggest challenger to this date is Jax Lendeborg, right? They were matched up against each other for a lot of the game. It was very clear who won that matchup, right? Cam Boozer won the matchup. He had more rebounds, he had more assists, he had more impactful plays down the stretch of the game that allowed his team to win. And it's not very often we get like the individual matchups where you were guarding each other. Again, I know there was different strategies that were used by both sides here, but when you were both at the 4 going against each other and one guy comes out on top, that tends to carry a lot of weight. And when the guy who is the favorite wins the matchup and leads his team to a victory, the way Boozer made all those plays late in the game, the buckets, the 3-pointer that he hit, some of the assists he had late in the game that were crucial, or the passes he had late in the game that were crucial, Cam Boozer's National Player of the Year. No debate about that. With Michigan, we've talked for a good portion of the season now. There are 3 things that determine what their ceiling is going to be. They have to not turn the ball over, which they did not in this game. Turned it over 7 times. Duke turned it over 11. They did fine there. They have to make their threes, which they did not in this game. Duke, we wondered how that was going to happen against Duke's length. Duke made them play in the half court. They did not get as many open threes as they do in transition. And they also missed some threes they normally make too. So that plays into it as well. But shooting 24%, Michigan's not going to beat other good teams shooting that way. And Jackson Lindenborg has to be the best player on the court. And he was not, particularly in the second half. We only had 5 points in the second half. This Michigan team is still very, very good. Like this does not, because they lost to Duke in DC, does not mean that Michigan is like going to lose in the second round of the tournament or anything like that. But I do think this shows you that they are mortal. And that was a question coming in this game, was if Michigan was truly like the dominant force in the country, and they're not. Now, it did take Duke to beat them, but Duke didn't do anything out of the ordinary to truly beat them in this game. They shot 6 of 19 from 3 as well. They lost the turnover battle. They did dominate Michigan's front line on the glass, which was huge. Like Nick Kamania coming off the bench, getting 9 rebounds of his own, tells you a lot about how Duke matched physicality and really set the tone physically in this game. They just came ready to play and truly beat Michigan. Their defense, Duke's defense, dictated this game and was the biggest factor.
I mean, you mentioned a few different factors for Michigan in terms of what they need to do to win. I think it's simpler. It's one factor, and it's the 3-point line. Just right in our faces right now this week, Purdue and Duke. Against Purdue, what was that? 13 threes on 57%. Against Duke, 6 threes on 24%. But it's deeper than that. That, crazy Gonzaga win, they hit 13 threes. The Auburn win by 30, they hit 14 threes. And then you think about their bad games. Against Wisconsin, they hit 8. The Penn State, conundrum, they beat them by 50 and they beat them by 2. In the huge giant win, they hit 15 threes, and in the game they barely won by 2 points, they hit 8 threes. Early on in the season, TCU and Wake Forest, they almost lost both of those games. They hit 4 against Wake. They hit 5 against TCU. It's directly correlated. They're going to shoot a lot of threes because of how they play. It was a question going into the year because Elliot Cadeau was their point guard. Jackson Lindenborg is more of a 4 playing the 3, and some of their guards have been shaky shooters. If they hit threes, they look like they will never lose a game to anyone ever. And when they don't, almost lost to Penn State, the Duke loss, the Wisconsin loss, it's very much, do you hit threes or do you not hit threes for them to look dominant or very good? And they will lose to someone if they are just very good.
I think their 3-point reliance has been an under-discussed storyline this season because they have been so good in other areas. And when they have played a lot of their bigger games, they have hit the threes that they've needed to hit. But if we are boiling this down to 3-point dependency, teams that are very 3-point dependent tend to not win championships. It was why there was all the skepticism going back to when the Golden State Warriors first started coming up, because up until that point, jump shooting teams had not won championships. You needed something else that was more reliable because of your shooting variance. It's going to happen. Well, obviously Golden State kind of blew the cover off that because they have probably the two best shooters in basketball history, right? Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Suddenly that worked. You have 2 of the best in history at something. You're going to utilize it. It has not been able to truly be replicated. Like, I know that they led the 3-point revolution and teams are going to shoot more threes. Now, I'm not saying that Michigan should not shoot threes. but they're the only team that has been like truly 3-point reliant that has won titles
Villanova
at any level. At any level. Well, Villanova was able to beat you driving to the basket too. Like Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart getting to the rim were big parts of those teams, right? Like that was a strength of theirs, but they did other things too. And this Michigan team does have other things too. Like the front court's great. Jackson Lindenberg going to the lane is great, but I want to see them not be as 3-point dependent in these spots. And maybe some of it is not being as transition dependent as well. The half court execution has to improve because Duke did not let them get out in transition in this game. And the half court offense kind of showed that. The same token, how many teams are as good defensively as Duke is? How many teams are as big as Duke is? Like that's why we're not talking about Michigan like being vulnerable to an upset here. But as we're looking at them through a lens of winning a national championship, that's where Michigan is. There are more questions now against this kind of team than there were because Duke was able to do something that I don't think many of the teams Michigan has played have had the ability to do because they're not top 5 teams in the country.
If you can slow down Michigan's transition, if you can force them to shoot threes, then you can beat them. If you can't do both of those things, you will not beat them. And then the last thing I'll say is we're talking about the 3-point revolution, but Elliot Cadeau is not Stephen Curry. So that's a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, he is so improved. So improved. And I know for him, he wanted to have a big game in this because of the whole UNC thing, right? At some point, he's not a 40% career 3-point shooter. There were going to be bad games, and it stinks for him that this was one of those bad games. But let's talk more about Duke, because Duke won this game. Like, they're going to be number 1 in the AP poll. They're probably going to be the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament now, unless they falter down the stretch, which the last 3 games in the ACC for them are Virginia and at NC State and UNC. Like, there is the potential for Duke to lose here and still be a really good team, a national championship worthy team. But did they show you anything differently in this game? Did this change how you feel about them moving forward?
You cannot make Duke not play their game. That's their biggest strength outside of having the best player in the country. This was all Duke, the way that they played this game. And honestly, you can say that about every game they've played all year. You cannot push them out of their game plan. And that's a huge strength. The only way to really beat them is to be phenomenal. Because to do that is to, the elite shot making of Christian Anderson down the stretch of that Texas Tech game comes to mind. The crazy late game execution for North Carolina, that last play, and the way they were able to out execute Duke in the half court in the last couple of minutes. Because Duke doesn't have an elite guard, there's just, they're not going to absolutely blow the doors off of you. They're not going to run in transition as much. And the 3-point shooting has really just been average. And like you mentioned, it was averaging it in this game. But against a team that has the best player in the country, who you cannot rattle out of the way that they want to play, it's just a tough game to win. Duke is not going to lose it. You're going to have to take it from them.
The late game stuff is, I think, the only criticism that is sometimes valid for Duke, because they did falter down the stretch of that UNC game. They couldn't get buckets. They did falter down the stretch against Texas Tech. They just couldn't get buckets. And I do think some of that is directly correlated to the fact that there is not a ball-dominant guard who can go get you a bucket when you need one. But they've also won a ton of games like this back in November and December with Boozer as your de facto point guard in those late game situations, right? You go back to the North Carolina game, and I'll give Shire a ton of credit for this, which he deserves a ton of credit, by the way, for his on-court coaching. I know he's the best recruiter in the game as well. He is one of the best on-court coaches in the game too. And I think we saw that in this game. The defensive scheme, some of the offensive play calls and when he called them and how he set them up were phenomenal. In the UNC game, the possession before Seth Trimble's shot, Boozer had an ISO, got to the lane, missed the layup, right? And everyone's like, oh, there's Shire. Why are you calling late game ISOs when you didn't work with Cooper Flagg last year? And he was like, take that look again. The best player in the country got to the rim, got an open, he just missed.
Yeah.
And the not overreacting to it, I think matters a lot, because he's stuck with Boozer making decisions. And you want Cam Boozer making decisions. You want the ball in his game with how high his basketball IQ is and how skilled he is. You want the ball in his hands. And I know he wasn't the guy who made all of the plays. He made a lot of them down the stretch. And I think it is something where it's like, if Duke loses, I think it could be because they are up a couple buckets late and then go on a bit of a drought at the end, because we saw that against Texas Tech, saw that against UNC. That's the only way they've lost this season. But it's not a guarantee that's going to happen, because they've also won games that way. And if that is your one criticism or thing you can look at for Duke, where it's like, that's why they're not going to win, they've proven they can do it. And they just proved they could do it against what we thought was the most dominant team in the country. It may still be the most dominant team in the country. Like, this Duke team, to me, I know I said we're going to pick Arizona to win the national championship. It's going to probably be over Duke. Like, Duke is, I'm just right in the Final Four. Yep, get there. I think I'm pretty set with that too.
It would take a superhuman effort from a non-1 seed to beat Arizona or Duke before the Final Four. It would not take a superhuman effort to beat Michigan. However, Michigan could also 10-point win every game UConn tournament run this thing. They have that ability that Duke and Arizona do not. But I would say it's more likely that Michigan loses earlier than Duke and Arizona.
That is a phenomenal way to describe it. Michigan probably has the highest ceiling, but you need to play at a special level to beat Arizona and Duke, where you could potentially beat Michigan just playing good.
Like Wisconsin, although they did hit a lot of threes.
Yes, but Wisconsin did that for an extended stretch here.
I mean, let's get to Wisconsin is the worst team that any of those three teams has lost to.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Easily. Let's get to the nightcap back in the Big 12, which was the A.J. DeBonsa show. He finished with 29, 10, and 9, almost a triple-double for him in BYU's victory over Iowa State. A win BYU kind of needed because they had not beaten one of the other top teams in the Big 12. Iowa State had just come off of 2 great home victories over Houston, over Kansas. No real concern about Iowa State for me from that standpoint. But what does this mean for BYU? And what does this mean for DeBonsa, having just finally gone off in a way that we've been needing to see from him against a high-level team?
I mean, my God, 2 games without Richie Saunders, and DeBonsa gets Arizona, Iowa State, and scores 35 and 29. That's insane.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. When he plays like the second best player in the country, which he has done the last 2 games against unbelievable opponents, BYU can beat anyone because he's so darn good. This is the reason they won this game. Obviously, home court's a big deal. Iowa State off of a huge win going cross country is a huge deal. BYU won this game because A.J. DeBonsa was the best player in the game by far, and it wasn't even close. There's not a lot else on this BYU roster. Kennard Davis played well. He's not going to play well every game. He's been inconsistent. Mihailo Boskovich played well. He's definitely not going to play well every game. But BYU showed in this matchup that they can beat you because unless you're playing Duke, they got the best player on the floor.
Yeah. He has looked like the number 1 pick. This was a number 1 pick type of performance, right? Couple that with more questions about Darren Peterson that have popped up over the last couple of weeks. It's a debate that's going to go on and on, probably, for the next decade or 2, really. It was just a phenomenal showing from him. And I do think the Richie Saunders injury sucks and does not make BYU better without him. I do not want this to be taken in a different way. But I do think it has made it undeniable to both BYU and to DeBonsa that he's got to be the guy. And I think you've seen him kind of meet that moment these last 2 games with his level of play, right? And now he's also been more efficient than he has been, but I think he's been more aggressive than he has been because he knows that he needs to have a big game for BYU to have a chance. And BYU also kind of knows they need a big game from him for them to have a chance. And I think that clarity, he's the only one of 3 or 4 players in the country who I think can make a Final Four on his own, go on a Kemba Walker type deal. And that's what he did tonight against an Iowa State defense that is awesome. The flip side of this too, because we just talked about, how good he is offensively. He was the primary defender on Milan Momcilovic all night. And Momcilovic was 1 of 5 shooting in this game, if I remember correctly. Momcilovic is not somebody who, is going to go one-on-one against.
Yeah.
But he limited his impact. And I think that had just as big of an impact on this game as anything else other than what he did offensively.
Yeah, I mean, Momcilovic is unbelievable, but it's not like he's the toughest guard in the country, the toughest person.
No.
Like, close out hard. That matters. But yeah, this was a scheduling loss for Iowa State, as much as there really could be off of their biggest win of the season. Go cross country, same week, BYU, crazy home crowd. What can you do?
If you do want to dig deeper into the Iowa State side of things, the losses have been on the road. Do you read anything into like the big wins have been at home and the losses have been on the road? Do you read anything into that? Of course, the Purdue win at Mackey aside, in Big 12 play, the losses have been in the big games on the road. The wins have been in the big games at home. Is there anything worth reading into from that standpoint in your mind?
No, I mean, like, that's what's supposed to happen when you play really good teams outside of the Cincinnati. I guess Cincinnati and TCU, and I know we'll talk about Cincinnati, but it happens. You're not going to. There's no road games in the NCAA tournament, right? So this team's still really good. They're still a better defensive than offensive team, and unlike Houston, their defense has shown up in these big games. It's just they've had some offensive issues, which are things where it's like you got to hit your shots. Milan Momcilovic is your best offensive player. He's got to take more than 5 shots, not be in foul trouble. It happens if like they get one more road game for the rest of the year, and it's Arizona. They're not going to win that one, most likely. They're probably going to end this season with their only big road win being Purdue. I don't think that necessarily changes a whole ton.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I do see that as potentially being a critique that we will hear moving forward. So just want to prepare our listeners. You hear it. I would not put a ton of stock in that. Let's touch on VCU St. Louis. Not just because of the brawl that happened at the end of the game, but this was basically the A-10 regular season championship game. VCU controlled it for a good portion, and then St. Louis still ends up with a convincing victory because of the way they played that second half. What did you see in this game that made the difference and allowed the Billikens to really turn it on late?
Yeah, this was St. Louis this season personified. They don't always play well. They don't always play well for a full game, but when they're clicking, when they're on, they look unbeatable. 24-4 run in the second half here completely blew this game open. They went from being down 14 in the first half to up 19 at one point in the second half. That's just something that few teams in the country can match. I don't care that it's VCU. VCU, for their own right, very, very good basketball team. St. Louis did not make it look remotely competitive in the second half. They just take perfect shots. St. Louis is as disciplined in taking and allowing the shots that they do. It's truly unbelievable. Their average 2-point distance in this game was 3.1 feet. The average shot they took was basically at the hoop from 2. And then they took 25 threes and made 40% of them. When you are taking only rim attempts and making 40% of your 25 threes, it's just a perfect shot diet. That's what Josh Schertz is known for. This team is perfectly recruited to be able to play that style. Everyone knows their role. There never feels like blank space on this roster. Everyone's doing something valuable to their team. It's truly the best watch in college basketball right now. You got to tune in when St. Louis, especially when they're playing a good team.
Yeah, I think this was the recipe for how you were going to beat St. Louis at St. Louis, and it didn't matter because the spurtability of St. Louis is going to allow them to win any game that they play. They did not play well for 25, 30 minutes, and the result was never in doubt in their favor. Right? Like that's a special team, and we talk about like it's going to take a superhuman performance to beat some of these top teams in the country. One of the reasons why St. Louis is ranked as highly as they are and viewed the way that they are is not only because they're really, really good on a game-to-game basis, right? You've only lost twice all year. They have talent, but they're one of the few teams that can rip off runs like this against anybody. And it's with their shooting. Like that's the primary reason, but it's not because they suddenly get hot from 3 often. The offense is, they have it down. They are surgical with their execution. They get good looks and they find ways to get good looks. They're a great passing team. And all that was on display again in a game where I think VCU should have felt really good about their chances to get that game. And then it didn't matter. It didn't matter what they did. That just speaks to how good St. Louis is.
Yeah, you talk about spurtability. They're number 1 in the country in kill shots per game, thanks to evanmia.com. That is 1.35 kill shots per game. More than one 10-0 run per game on average is insane.
Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Those were the biggest games, and I think the biggest results, obviously, of the weekend. Well, maybe not biggest results. We'll touch on that here, but where else do you want to take us and make sure we touch on here before we look at the week ahead?
We just talked about the top of the A10, which is the seventh best league in the country. Outside of the Power 5, the best by far is the Mountain West, who has underratedly been unbelievable in their last full year of the current construction that they're in. All but 4 of their teams are in the top 100 in KenPom. 2 of them, UNLV and Fresno State, are in the top 125. And then San Jose State and Air Force are way down at the bottom there. But what an amazing top of this league. Utah State at 13-3, New Mexico and San Diego State 1 game behind at 12-4. These teams all play each other. San Diego State goes Utah State, then right into New Mexico. They win both of those games. They're back in first place. Utah State wins their game against San Diego State and New Mexico. They win the league. It's the top of the league is fantastic. Unfortunately, because the non-con was bad, I don't think all 3 of them are going to get into the NCAA tournament. So we'll see how this all plays out. But let's just, enjoy this last couple of weeks of this current Mountain West, because it's a really good league.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I do think things were on the table a week and a half ago for all 3 to make it, or this to be a 3-bid league. And San Diego State has crapped the bed. Losses to at home to Grand Canyon and at Colorado State. They have an uphill battle. Like, I think they can beat Utah State and New Mexico and still end up on the wrong side of the bubble in certain situations. Things have to happen elsewhere, but they have put themselves in a rough spot. They're 5-4 in their last 9 games. And the losses to Grand Canyon, it's interesting. Utah State lost. You're not going to necessarily criticize them for that. This Colorado State won, and it was on the road, and Colorado State is a solid team. But that was the first one where you're kind of like, okay, maybe this team isn't going to make the tournament without an auto bid, right? If they beat Utah State and New Mexico, conversation shifts. But the way they're playing, I don't trust them to win both those games. Certainly. Like that to me has been a problem. And the offense is now sub 100 in the country. I don't know. I don't know. This team to me is not the best. Yes.
Here's a question for you. So Colorado State's 88th in KenPom. You know who's below 88th? DePaul, Xavier, Marquette. Let's just do a couple more. Georgia Tech, Boston College, Pitt, Notre Dame. If San Diego State lost to one of those teams at home, maybe outside of Boston College, if San Diego State lost to one of those teams on the road, we wouldn't be like, oh, no, they suck now, like no tournament. Because it's not a Power 5 team, we're like, okay, well, this is a huge deal. A road loss to a power conference opponent should not eliminate your resume chances. And Colorado State is good enough to be a power conference opponent, even if it's a lower level one.
First off, I think we would if that power conference team did not have any wins, like San Diego State does not have any wins, right? We did this with NC State when they lost at home. That was at home to Georgia Tech, and they didn't have any wins.
Georgia Tech's way worse than Colorado State. Way worse.
Well, right, but I'm saying from the standpoint of they don't have any wins to offset that, right? Yeah. And I think that's a bit of a problem here because their best win is at home against New Mexico, which is another bubble team in their own right.
Yeah.
They don't have the other wins to fall back on here, and they have 2 more chances to get one, and really 1 more chance to get one. Although a win at New Mexico would qualify with that being on the road.
Oh yeah.
They have put themselves where it's an uphill battle, which is not normal for San Diego State.
If they beat Utah State and then go to New Mexico and go to Boise State and win all 3 of those, they're a tournament team to me.
The way they're playing, I do not expect that to happen.
Fair enough.
KenPom has them as underdogs in all 3 of those games.
Ugh.
Not ideal. Not ideal. Coincide that with the way Cincinnati's been playing recently, which is one of the most inexplicable things that has happened in college basketball this year. If we were to tell you that this was the year Kansas would have suffered its worst home loss under Bill Self, you'd probably be like, okay, that means like this awesome Iowa State team went off there. Houston did. Arizona was undefeated for forever. Maybe it was them. AJ DeBonsa goes off there. Cincinnati, Wes Miller, Cincinnati walked into Kansas and beat them by 16, beat them like a drum in this game, which was incredibly unexpected. Cincinnati has won 4 games in a row now, which, beating Kansas State and Utah are not program defining wins. But you did beat UCF, who's going to make the tournament, barring an epic collapse down the stretch here, which they squeaked by Utah, which would have been an epic collapse. But you beat a tournament team, and then you follow that up with a win at Kansas. There's a decent chance that they go 3-1 down the stretch because they have Oklahoma State at home at TCU. That TCU game could be interesting. But this week they go at Texas Tech, which is much more winnable now without JT Toppin. They're still not favored to win that game, obviously, but they weren't favored to go beat Kansas in Allen Fieldhouse by 16. And you get BYU at home. They go 3-1 down the stretch here. Cincinnati has a chance to make things really interesting from an NCAA tournament perspective. Not something we would have thought after they lost to West Virginia, and Wes Miller was telling everybody that he's sorry and he knows this is unacceptable and all of this. But since that loss, they're 6th in the country in Torvik in terms of their power rating during this 4-game win streak.
4 games.
It's one of the most inexplicable, just like sudden spikes in play I've ever seen.
It's explicable to me. It makes sense to me. They're really, really talented, and they have really good players. They're huge. They're awesome defensively, and they take horrible shots, and the offense is gross. They beat 3 bad defensive teams. UCF, I don't think they're a tournament team, but either way, they're 114th in defense. Kansas State, 126th. Utah, 164th. And then they go into Kansas and they have an outlier shooting game where Mustafa Tiem hits 2 threes, Jalen Celestine hits 4, Baba Miller, who before those 2 threes he hit in that game he was 4 for 25 from 3, goes and makes them both. Outlier shooting game. They're really talented. They're awesome defensively. Wes Miller cannot coach offense, and this team cannot play offense. You said they need to go 3-1 down the stretch. They're not going 3-1. They're not beating one of Texas Tech or BYU. They're probably not winning at TCU. This team will lose a game just as bad as they just won one as impressive at Kansas. They are... A season's a full season. It's a small stretch. They beat one good team over that stretch. They're not good. It hasn't changed anything.
That's why it is the most random results I've seen since Ohio State fired Chris Holtmann and then ripped off a whole bunch of runs to they hired Diebler, which there are Ohio State fans who are having the conversation if that was the best thing for the program long term, which I think Cincinnati fans are probably having right now, right? Wes Miller seems like an awesome dude. I haven't met him, but he seems like an awesome dude, and everything about him going back to his time at North Carolina would reflect that. Cincinnati fans have to be celebrating the fact that they just beat Kansas. But is there a part of them that is just like, let's lose a couple and keep this going on track? Would I wonder if they'd rather have that, or if they'd rather let's just keep winning and see if our chances of getting into the first 4 in Dayton.
I'm sorry. My only thought to that is it doesn't matter because they're not going to make the tournament. They're not going to go 3-1, and then the season's going to end, and we're going to remember this fun little blip where they beat Kansas, and it's not going to matter in the grand scheme of things.
It's more than likely not. But they did make 12 threes against Kansas, but it wasn't like they shot 50-something%. They were 12-31 from 3. I'm not saying it's sustainable. I did not bring this up to be pounding the table for Cincinnati and that they've suddenly turned a corner and they're going to do this stuff. But it's on the table. And the fact it was on the table, given where we were at 2 weeks ago when they lost by 5 to West Virginia at home, is startling.
Fair.
It's startling to me.
I mean, it was also a look ahead for Kansas, which I'm sure we'll get to now.
Yes, we'll get to that because they're hosting Houston. Which has plenty of storylines in its own right. But the end result of this game is either going to be Kansas losing at home on Big Monday for the first time under Bill Self, or Houston losing 3 games in a row, which feels equally as impossible. There are going to be tough spots given the way the Big 12 backloaded the schedule. This feels like an impossible spot for both of these teams because you're not going to go into Allen Fieldhouse on Big Monday after a disappointing loss like that and win. But you're also not going to beat Houston after they just lost 2 games and Kelvin Sampson is all over them, right? Like, that's just the way we think about both these programs and the respect we have for both of these programs and coaching staffs. But this is going to happen. One of those 2 things is going to happen. In your mind in this game, what are the biggest factors and the biggest kind of matchups that are going to dictate what does happen in this game?
Well, Houston and Iowa State play very similar defensive styles. Very, very similar in terms of the way that they trap everything, play overly aggressive, and force ball movement. Darren Peterson was very bad against Iowa State's scheme. He had 10 points, 0 assists, 3 turnovers in 23 minutes. I hope he learned from that experience because he's going to get the exact same coverage here. He is not seeing one-on-one at any point, and he's going to have to either hit tough shots off the catch or swing that ball, because he kind of did neither in that Iowa State game, and Kansas offense looked horrible. We talked about how Houston's defenses really, really struggled against the elite offenses in the country. The only question is Kansas's offense a really good offensive unit? Because they have not shown that in large stretches. And of course, that Arizona win was without Peterson. You would imagine Peterson plays in this one. Was the Cincinnati loss Kansas showing, its downside, or was it a look-ahead spot? I think probably a little bit of both. But if Houston's not forcing turnovers and Houston's not dominating the glass, it doesn't really matter, because at Kansas is not where you can play a subpar defensive game and win.
No, it's not. The one thing with Kansas in that Cincinnati loss as well, Bryson Tiller did not make an impact. Melvin Council was inefficient. And Melvin Council has been inefficient before, but has produced enough to where it hasn't necessarily mattered. He was inefficient without great production in that game. And when Kansas has looked the best, when they have won some of these big games and looked like a team that can make a Final Four, Darren Peterson has played. Darren Peterson has played. But also, Tiller has had quality performances, and Council has produced. Not always been the most efficient. You go back to the 6-25 game he had, where they beat Iowa State. It was at home, or was it? It was Iowa State at home, where it was 6-25. But he produced enough to where it kind of offset that, and he made the plays down the stretch he needed to make. That, I think, is what it boils down to for Kansas at this point. Floyd Badunga is playing at a really high level, and I think we've come to know now like what we can expect from him on both ends on a game-to-game basis. If Trey White flashes, that's great, but they've won games where he's played well. They've lost games where he's played well. Darren Peterson is going to be an X factor, because whenever he's on the court and actually playing, he is so efficient, it's not going to matter. He's going to give you positive minutes. It's those 2 guys. Those 2 guys have been the biggest variance for me for Kansas, is Council and Tiller. If they play well, they have a great chance to beat Houston at home, right? But if they don't, then Kansas is a little bit more vulnerable than they have been. And Cincinnati played really well. But if I'm drawing like some legitimate parallels into like what happened against Cincinnati that is indicative of things that have mattered, I think it's those 2 guys. I think it's those 2 guys for Kansas.
Honestly, though, like if I'm analyzing this game, Houston, Kansas, I'm not thinking about that Cincinnati game. Obviously, it didn't go well, but I think that where you kind of get into issues is when you overly analyze one game as it pertains to the next. It's a long season. The season's almost over. Yeah. I've been harping on this for weeks. These teams are who we thought they were 2 weeks ago, or who we thought they were a month ago. Like, a bad month, a bad stretch, a bad week, it doesn't really change much, barring huge injury, which we've had a couple in the Big 12, or barring like a huge losing streak where the same problem has come up. Like, we're 3 games past Kansas ending Arizona's undefeated season. This is still an awesome basketball team.
Oh, yeah. That's why I say, like, I think if you are going to take anything from the Cincinnati game, it's those 2 guys, because that has flashed at times this season when Kansas has struggled, right? The rest of the Cincinnati game, you flush it, burn the tape, do all that kind of stuff. From the Houston perspective, is it just a matter of forcing turnovers and playing better defensively, or are there other things that they need to do better or improve upon that they need to do to go in Allen Fieldhouse and win?
Kingston Flemings or no Kingston Flemings, the function of this offense is identical from last year. They take the exact same shots, but they're not getting the rebounds and they're not forcing turnovers. That's it. Get the rebounds, get the turnovers. This team is just as good as last year. Don't do those things, and suddenly it's not the same team. It's not the same deal.
Yeah, that'll be a really fun game. UConn St. John's will be a really fun game later this week as well. We talked about how UConn's defense has not been great and how Dan Hurley called that out after they got smacked by Creighton. They showed up with, I think, their best defensive performance, at least since November, against Villanova. They won handily at Villanova on Saturday. They now have the biggest game they will have until a potential Big East championship game and then NCAA tournament. And this is the biggest game left on UConn's schedule. This is the biggest game left on St. John's schedule until that. The first game was a lot of fun. In fact, this game will be a lot of fun as well. What's going to matter in this game that's going to determine the outcome?
Yeah, UConn played well against Villanova, but we're 2 games removed from losing to Creighton, and then St. John's got Creighton on Saturday and beat them by 29. St. John's has been unbelievable since losing to Providence on January 3rd. It's been almost 2 months. They have not lost, and quite frankly, outside of a random overtime win against Xavier and like a whole Patino versus Patino, whatever that was, they've been basically untouchable. UConn's a 6-point favorite on Ken Pom in this game. I don't know if I believe that they are 3 points better on a neutral court, if you want to give 3 points for home here. But inevitably, this game boils down to Silas Demery, because Silas Demery had, 9 turnovers in game 1 of this matchup against the St. John's pressure. UConn, home, road, Antarctica, doesn't matter. They're not beating St. John's if Silas Demery has 9 turnovers. So this is up to him. If he controls the ball, if this game is slow, if there's not a lot of turnovers, it's UConn's favor. They're a better half-court execution team. They'll win this game. But if St. John's can get under Demery's skin again, it's not like UConn is going to be all Malachi Smith dependent. This is on Demery. This season lies in Demery's hands in many ways, and this is the biggest test he's had since he failed the last one.
Nothing St. John's is going to do in this game, I think, is going to change my outcome or my opinion of what their season outcome is going to be. I think we know who they are. They've shown so much since they lost to Providence. Moved Dylan Mitchell to more point guard duties. They've kind of figured out some spacing. Offensively, the defense has been spectacular. Losing to UConn after you've already beaten them is not going to change my opinion. Even if they, in your words, even if they were to lose by 75, would not change my opinion.
That's just catch me on. Let's go.
A 75-point loss would change my opinion of St. John's. But I don't think there's anything material there from what we'll realistically see from the Red Storm that would change my impact of them. I do think there's more on the table from UConn from that standpoint. Is they've been good all season long, right? But they have not been playing at the UConn standard all season long. It's been about 2 months since they have, and that was what I talked about before the Villanova game. We want to see them get back to playing at that level. Villanova game was them playing at the UConn level, right? The defense was spectacular. Offense was balanced. You had some good shot creation. You had guys who made open looks. That looked like UConn basketball under Dan Hurley. Do that against St. John's, you will win the game, and then there's the conversations about like what they can do down the stretch. If they can make the Final Four, win the national championship, everything like that. If you lose, it's probably going to be because you turned it over a ton, as you mentioned, couldn't handle pressure, or you didn't shoot it well, which you've seen them do against teams pressure them, or they couldn't handle St. John's size and physicality inside, which is not a problem UConn's had this year, but they do play one true big at the time, and Alex Caravan, for as good as he is basically a 3 playing a 4-man. And that works for UConn. I'm not sitting here telling you that they need to not play Alex Caravan, because they need to play Alex Caravan. But like those are 3 things that could happen that would cause UConn to lose, right? If they play at their level, if they play to their standard, then everything, all of that stuff is a non-issue, and I think can feel really good about UConn going forward.
St. John's is the only team that UConn will play for the rest of the season that is good enough, is the caliber of a team that UConn will see in the Sweet 16 or beyond. If they lose
Yes.
both, that is a bad sign for their chances of advancing past the beginning of the second weekend.
If UConn wins this game, there's going to be a lot more talk about what they did in November and December than there has been since, because they have not played to that level. But this was the same team that back in our conference play, they right there with Arizona, they had the Florida win. They had like top wins against everybody. That the BYU win. Suddenly you're going to start being like, oh yeah, this team UConn did beat that team. UConn beat that team too. And I think we've kind of forgotten that because the level of play had not indicated they could get back to that level. This is a game that can really indicate UConn is back.
Yeah, UConn really needed like a Duke Michigan for Duke's perspective, because we got to see Duke out of the ACC. We're not getting that for UConn. So yeah, they're a little bit of a mystery box, especially if they lose this one as well.
Let's go to the last big game here we're going to talk about for the week ahead, which is Michigan State and Purdue. I have thoughts about both of these teams, but from a matchup standpoint, what are you looking for here beyond the Jeremy Fears, Braden Smith? What could happen with this point guard battle?
It's the glass, because this was something that Purdue was supposed to be a strength of theirs this season. And then it was in the non-con, but in conference play, they have not been the same rebounding team. And of course, Michigan State's the best rebounding team in the country. And if they're not best, they're number 2 behind Florida. So if Michigan State, I mean, we saw that Illinois game, obviously Keaton Wagler being unbelievable was the main story, but the subplot was Illinois won the glass 33-19. If Michigan State wins the glass by that amount, and this game is at Purdue, obviously Michigan State does not have the shot making of Keaton Wagler, but they're going to need to win the boards to that extent. Tom Izzo has seen Braden Smith before. This is not a new challenge for him to try to overcome, and you know that he'll come out with a good game plan. But if they cannot win the boards, if Purdue can play to their ability on that level, which they will have playing 2 bigs, then that is the game there, because Michigan State cannot outshot make the Boilermakers.
I think you're right on with that from this particular matchup. Big picture, though, I don't think whatever happens in this game changes my opinion on either one of these teams. Both of these teams are flawed. Both these teams are very flawed, and beating Purdue or beating Michigan State is going to feel really good. Neither team is going to show anything that shows their ceiling is higher. Right? Again, barring injury, because obviously that's going to impact the rest of the season. If Purdue wins, it's going to be because they were able to match Michigan State on the glass. Michigan State was not able to exploit some of the defensive issues that Purdue has had. Right? Michigan State wins, it's going to be because they did dominate Purdue on the glass, and defensively they're able to frustrate Purdue's shooters, and their front court physicality disrupted Purdue's front court physicality. Maybe Jeremy Fears gets under Braden Smith's skin. Who knows, right? Like, but neither one of those things suddenly is like, oh, Michigan State is different than we thought was going to happen, or Purdue is different than we thought they were going to be. Maybe the only thing could be saying that Purdue's floor is higher than maybe I think it is right now, because I do think both these teams have a very limited ceiling. Purdue, I feel so weird about this Purdue team, because the things they should be good at, they sometimes like are awful with. And I don't know how I feel about that. And maybe beating Michigan State shows me like, okay, the front court can handle this against another good front court. But the end result of this game to me is inconsequential past what it means for seeding in the Big Ten tournament.
I will say this. If Michigan shot against Purdue how they shot against Duke on open threes, Purdue wins that game, and we're having a different conversation.
But Purdue, Michigan got much better looks.
No, yeah, it's true. They got better looks, but they still hit their open threes. And against Duke, obviously not all their looks were open, but there were open threes that they missed. If they shot 57% against Duke. If they shot, against Purdue, if they shot 37%, maybe Purdue wins. And again, entirely different conversation.
It could be. Well, let's get to picking these games, because we're over an hour here, which it was a big week, weekend, big week. Houston and Kansas. I've gone first the last 2 times. You are now 3 up on the picks for the season. I had St. Louis beating VCU. You had Arizona and Duke winning. So you gained one back. You're now 3 up. Houston or Kansas for you? Who wins that crucial Big 12 showdown?
College basketball is a funny sport. I think Kansas is going to bounce back in a really fun way. They're going to win this one.
I have more questions about Houston than I do Kansas.
You're going to pick Kansas too.
I'm going to pick Kansas too.
Okay, can I switch then? I'll take Houston. I just thought you were going to take. I'll take Houston. I'll change my mind. I'll take Houston.
Yeah, I have more questions about Houston than I do Kansas.
Okay,
like if you're having long offensive droughts, going to play in Fog Allen in a close game probably means that's going to lend itself to maybe some offensive questions. As well.
I was being courteous, but if you're giving me Houston, I'll take Houston.
Yeah, I'm being courteous by taking Kansas at home on Big Monday.
Yeah, Houston not losing 3 straight.
That's going to be the fun matchup. UConn, St. John's.
UConn at home, too much to overcome. I think UConn finally figures it out.
I'm taking UConn as well. I think it'll be close, but I've said, or I wrote in Friday's Rauf report that I think this is UConn getting back to the UConn standard. Showed what I wanted to see against Villanova. I think they played at that level. Michigan State, Purdue.
Purdue, I'm going to say pretty easily.
I'm going to say Michigan State.
Okay.
I think they need to win the glass, and I trust their bigs more than I trust Purdue's bigs right now.
Fair. All right. Well, two against each other should be a fun. I could be up 5 in a couple of days from now. Who knows? Yeah,
it could also be 1 come the stretch here, which means more than likely we were going to split, and nothing will change there. Things will change around the country though this week based on the outcomes of these games. We'll be back on Friday to break all that down and look ahead to another massive weekend of college basketball, because that's all there is now. Just massive weeks and massive games. Going to be a lot of fun as we get here. Less than 3 weeks till Selection Sunday. We're getting right down to it. For Matthew Winick, I'm Brian Rauf. Talk to everybody on Friday.